This video features stunts performed by professionals. Tom and the YouTube community guidelines must insist that no one attempt to recreate any stunt or activity performed. This video was not to glorify the life of its subject, but to document it for educational purposes. And please don't contact or harass anyone involved. Thank you. Brandon Cole Margera was born on September 28, 1979. He grew up in Westchester, Pennsylvania with his older brother Jess. If not for them, his parents Phil and April were otherwise typical of the area. They weren't wealthy, but made enough to live comfortably. This allowed them to be easygoing about their children's future. That was at least true for Brandon, who quickly proved to be a problem child. Early on, he had a habit of purposely running into walls, leading his grandfather to nickname him Bam Bam. The name stuck, being shortened to just Bam by schoolmates. This compulsion to danger would never go away. Instead, his yearn for thrill-seeking led him to a lifelong love, skateboarding. He began skating with his brother at the age of just 7. They traveled almost every day to the local landmark, Love Park, for practice. Jess later recalled it was a place of drug deals, violence, and even gunfights. It definitely did not sound like a place for kids. But his parents continued to support their hobby, and by 13, Bam was skilled enough to get his first sponsor. Now attending East High School, by this point he had no interest in college or even graduating. He only stayed because of a childhood friend named Chris Rabb. They enrolled in the same classes to ensure constant hijinks. Chris was just as, if not more mischievous than Bam. He was suspended every other day, with the final straw amid an exam for health class. The boys missed their test and were told to make it up in a separate room. Rabb got so bored that he began urinating on his desk. Bam found this hysterical and dared him to defecate on a locker. Needless to say, Chris was expelled. Without his best friend, Bam saw no reason to stay in school. His attention was instead fully vested into skating. His teachers chastised this as nothing more than a fad. Because of this, it wasn't long until he dropped out. He'd pursue his GED through homeschooling. For as short as his time at East High was, it proved vital to his future, but not in the way the faculty would have expected. One of the electives they'd enrolled in was for digital media. This led Phil to buy him his first camera, which he used obsessively. But they'd also befriend 3 seniors named Art Webb, Brandon DiCamillo, and Ryan Dunn. Born in 1977, Dunn moved multiple times over the course of his childhood. He was born in Ohio, moved to New York, and finally ended up in Pennsylvania at 16. Ryan went on to become Bam's closest friend, hanging out together the most. The group originally snuck off during class to mess around, but with the 3 graduating and Bam and Chris dropping out, they could now hang out whenever they wanted. Together, they filmed skate videos, skits, and pranks. The foremost primarily starred Bam, who focused on skating full-time. Having a makeshift camera crew certainly helped him to make a name for himself. While Bam was never the best skater, what made him unique was the combination of stunt work and creativity. He'd ride on unusual obstacles with a comedic attitude. In general, their home movies captured the feeling of bros being bros. It showed how much fun they were having every day. They were adrenaline junkies looking to kill time. Because of this, he started to be featured in a variety of video magazines. When you're young, it's easy to feel invincible, but as you get older, you realize that's a mistake. And just a year after dropping out, this thrill-seeking would lead the boys to come face to face with their own mortality. On September 21st, 1995, Ryan Dunn picked up Bam, Jess, and Rabb after work. They began horsing around, so Dunn kept cranking up the volume to drown them out. This distracted him to the point that they reached 100 miles per hour. The vehicle then flipped over 8 times into oncoming traffic. Thankfully, the 4 weren't seriously injured. Bam broke a window with his head, and his brother flew out, breaking his arm. It was miraculous, as Bam later revealed that Rabb forced him to wear a seatbelt that day, saving his life. The accident should have been a wake-up call. Had things gone even slightly differently, they would have all been dead. But the worst day of their lives quickly became a funny anecdote as Bam's career only evolved. With his name becoming recognizable in the counterculture, he began traveling across the East Coast. It was his job now, netting him $750 a month. That included a stint in California with a deck company called Toy Machine. In 1998, they released a video called Jump Off a Bridge. It had scenes from his home videos, interspersing his tricks and stunts. This brief featurette would inspire Bam to create his own movie. His archive was now half a decade's worth of footage. He realized that with tight editing and a clear artistic vision, it could be made into something special. In pursuit of this, Bam disciplined himself, spending countless nights editing at home. He turned down opportunities to party in order to complete the film. The result was CKY. The name came from Jess's band, whose music underscored the entire tape. From jumping off of buildings to messing with strangers, it was exactly what you'd expect. It had slapstick and a wide variety of poop-related stunts. His parents also made appearances as the victim of pranks. With the film complete, he began looking for a distributor. He eventually secured a deal with Landspeed Wheels, who got it into skate shops. It was released to great acclaim, enough to incentivize a sequel. With more notoriety and income, he knew they had to go further. They filmed throughout their various travels, including a tour sponsored by Nike and a trip to Iceland. In 2000, their second tape was released. CKY2K took the original's format and introduced new bits, grosser pranks, and more polish. It was a much more cohesive experience, as the footage was shot with a specific intent. One notable change about CKY2K is its soundtrack. BAM chose to use copyrighted music from artists like Rammstein, Aphex Twin, and Bjork. It was very indicative of his approach to both film and life at the time. He had no fear of legal action because he had nothing to lose. I wasn't too liked by the police, but I didn't really have anything to lose. My aunt gave me an '89 Buick Regal, so whenever anybody said, "Dude, you're gonna get sued one day doing this," I'd say, "Yeah, what are they gonna sue me for? My Buick Regal that my aunt gave me? I don't care." In Iceland, BAM even wrecked a rental car so badly it ended up completely burnt. However, this mentality backfired. Beyond the obvious, one skit in particular led to legal issues. This is what happens when you tell BAM you'll do anything to be in CKY. The scene shows a 15-year-old fan flashing his bare buttocks and genitals to the camera. Yes, his parents sued and the DVD was discontinued. It more prominently featured BAM's family, including his uncle Vincent. His bizarre speech patterns and stature led him to be nicknamed Don Vito. Meanwhile, the pranks only became more mean-spirited. He'd just straight up beat his dad, even permanently injuring him during an interview. But it was good TV, and they withstood the antics, becoming important parts of his bit. CKY2K cemented the series as a staple of counterculture. It's important to remember that this was a time before YouTube. Nowadays, you can easily find so many people doing crazy stunts. But back then, this was it. It was everything kids wanted to be doing. Misbehaving in public, messing around with friends, having girls around, and all set to the sound of early 2000s rock. By 2002, he'd sold over 400,000 copies of the series. BAM became one of the most famous skateboarders in the entire world, beaten only by Tony Hawk. He would even star alongside him in the Pro Skater and Underground video games. It's a fact that BAM would have been famous no matter what given his momentum, but what truly catapulted him into the mainstream would be an entirely different venture from skating. And to understand how it came to be, we have to start with Big Brother. No, not the TV show. Big Brother was a skateboard magazine started in 1992. It covered street skating and the eventual subculture that developed around it. There was an edge, as nothing was off limits. There was nudity and various ramblings from staff about things like making a fake ID. It also sometimes had items like trading cards or cassettes. That was the case in 1996 when they produced their first tape, simply titled Shit. While skate-oriented, it also featured sparse stunts and pranks. They were well received and helped start trends of skate video, but they were also completely blown out of the water by BAM's series 3 years later. CKY2K amassed a far greater reception. This gave Jeff Tremaine, the magazine's editor, an idea. Was it possible for this genre to reach a mass audience? They'd already begun filming number 2. It was through this that they met an aspiring writer named Johnny Knoxville. Johnny wanted to pay tribute to gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson. He landed on an article in which he'd test self-defense equipment on himself. But every magazine he pitched to refused his idea due to concerns over liability. That is, everyone except Big Brother. In 1996, Tremaine reached out on their behalf. He expressed interest, but asked Knoxville to perform the stunt on camera. So he did, subjecting himself to pepper spray, a stun gun, a taser, and even a .38 caliber gun. He had unexpectedly good stage presence as well, sowing the seeds of his eventual role as a showman. They decided to use the footage for their next movie. The second Big Brother video was released in 1998. It was a hit, pushing the concept of a mainstream iteration forward. With the help of director Spike Jonze, they began discussing what the TV show could be. Knoxville envisioned himself as a host akin to The Daily Show, where people came on and did stunts. But that's when Spike finally said the obvious. You guys already have the show. The Big Brother videos. That's the show. What made the tapes weren't just their stunts, but their presentation. It was the comedy, the skating, and the aesthetic. So who better to call than Bam Margera himself? I remember when Jeff first called me. He flew me out to LA and played CKY2K for him and Johnny. They just loved it. They were like, "You'd be perfect for Jackass." Using pre-existing footage from both Big Brother and CKY, they would cut together a rough television pilot. They began pitching it to networks, with MTV prevailing due to their willingness to offer more creative freedom. And just like that, Jackass was born. Jackass drew his cast from the entire scene. Big Brother offered contributors Chris Pontius and Jason Wee Man Acuna. They also invited snowboarders Dave England and Aaron McGahee. Knoxville brought on his friend Preston as a writer, later convincing him to join in their stunts. Steve O was a flea market circus clown who saw the Big Brother tapes as an opportunity. He auditioned by sending a collection of his extreme stunts, landing him a spot. And of course, CKY. Bam brought with him Chris Rabb and Ryan Dunn, as well as a skater named Brandon Novak. This ragtag team of stuntmen would go on to become iconic and known worldwide for their collective hijinks. But at the time, they had little to no confidence. It was unclear if the humor would land beyond skateboarders. But MTV had confidence. The network were pitched a stunt show every other week, but they picked up Jackass because it felt different. It was genuine, as they'd done these things in the first place to entertain themselves, not an audience. In October of 2000, Jackass premiered and became an immediate runaway success. The cast went from unknown to extremely famous overnight, with the second episode breaking network records with 2.4 million viewers. It was a relief, but also a double-edged sword. Everything about their daredevil lifestyle was being encouraged. Their disregard for the law and self-endangerment. Those negative aspects were what made the show so appealing, and the overnight fame only propelled them to push the envelope even further. The obvious consequence of these injuries was an exposure to painkillers, which quickly led to addiction. Eventually, everyone was reliant on some kind of substance, which worsened their individual abuse. It began a continuous loop of justifying their usage by comparing it to someone else. But without a doubt, the bottom of their hierarchy was Steve-O. Steve-O began drinking as early as 12 and smoking pot at 16. By 17, he was doing acid on the way to high school. By the time he became a clown, he was snorting coke. But this use was irregular, as he was impoverished. With Jackass money, he was now able to afford loads of the expensive drug. He began to have all-night binges that lasted until the morning, on top of his already sleepless 4-day-long workdays. It was a positive reinforcement to all of his vices, one that only worsened the more he became successful.
I don't have a drinking problem. I have a drinking career.
Bam had his first drink upon turning 21 while Jackass was being made. It slowly became a habit as regular indulgence became a morning routine. He'd describe his alcoholism as, "One is too many, but 1,000 is never enough." Though Knoxville was host, sheer name recognition was enough for Bam to be second billing. I bring this up because there was a significant pay disparity among members. Steve-O was paid $500 for 2 particularly dangerous stunts, and otherwise was only paid $200 per bit. He'd make less than $1,500 after taxes for the first season. Bam, in the same amount of time, made enough to purchased 2 Audi S4s at once. He was paid approximately $4,000 per episode. Jackass also served to propel his other ventures, being a rocket ship to his pre-existing revenue. If Steve-O's earnings were enough to abuse, then Bam caused serious concern. He had the ability to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted, with no one who could tell him no. The Jackass TV show was short-lived. In spite of the disclaimers, it was blamed for a number of injuries and deaths among teens. In 2001, Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman sent a letter urging MTV's parent company to take greater responsibility over the show. This led all airings of Jackass before 10 p.m. to be canceled. That didn't stop Lieberman from continuing his campaign, continuing to chastise them publicly. So MTV began imposing more and more restrictions. They refused to rerun certain episodes, promoted it less, and gave increasingly more notes. It quickly demotivated the cast, who resented they were giving in. Eventually, they decided to quit in protest. Knoxville recalled, "I felt that we couldn't do a watered-down version of the show, so I quit. In hindsight, I didn't know how smart of a move that was, because who did I think I was? I hadn't had any action for 10 years in Hollywood, and suddenly we had a show and I quit? Thankfully, this wouldn't mean the end of Jackass. Far from it. MTV saw Jackass as a golden asset and tried everything they could to keep them, but nothing short of creative liberty would suffice. That's when they realized there was a chance for compromise. MTV needed projects for their film division and had been searching for a sketch movie. That's when they realized Jackass would make a great franchise. It proved to be the perfect solution. Being in theaters meant it could be R-rated, so they could do everything they wanted to on TV, and with that, they were back on board as production began. If the show made them stars, the movie made them icons. Jackass the movie debuted at number 1, grossing $23 million in its first weekend. That was over 4 times his budget of $5 million. Bam, as top billing, made $5 million, significantly more than most of his co-stars. Regardless, they were all able to launch this into their own careers. In 2003, MTV produced 2 Jackass spin-offs. The first was Wild Boys with Steve-O and Chris Pontius. The second was Viva La Bam. Viva La Bam was a reality show centering around Bam and his family and friends. It starred familiar faces like Chris Rabb, Ryan Dunn, and of course his family. Phil and April had already become fan favorites, but also on center stage was Don Vito, who became famous himself. Each episode had a specific theme with rather heavy scripting. Most of the pranks were entirely for the camera, but the show was still a hit, going on to have 5 seasons over the next 3 years. It seemed like his fame could only reach greater heights. He launched his own Sirius radio station called Radio Bam, started a music label, and appeared in a variety of different games and movies. He even began writing and directing his own films, which he funded out of his pocket. This all distracted him from skating, which became more and more sparse. He was completely suckered into the rock star lifestyle, becoming a full-blown celebrity, though it didn't stop his skateboard line from outselling Tony Hawk's. At the peak of his career, he had a net worth of $45 million. This lifestyle meant any need for humility or restraint was gone. He lived a luxurious, drug-laden life, spending every day partying. Joe France, a member of CKY, later revealed that at this point, Bam was a full-fledged cocaine addict. The success stunted his growth as he no longer had to learn important life life lessons that extended to his friends who had enough money to bail him out of trouble. In an interview, Bam recalled Rab flipped over his car while driving under the influence. This left him with a fine of $2,000, which Bam generously covered, but maybe he shouldn't have. Rab became trapped in an obsessive cycle, a slave to drugs and alcohol. He recalled binge drinking and doing coke 7 days a week. He'd eventually have to leave the cast and Bam for his own survival. If he hadn't, who knows how bad it could have gotten. At the same time, Bam cracked his skull open doing a stunt on MTV Cribs. The final episode of Viva La Bam aired in March of 2006. This is because, come January, they began filming a second Jackass. With a budget of almost $12 million, they took things to a new level. The extreme stunts were done across the globe, and they were able to shoot high-budget cinematic sequences. Because of his popularity, Jackass 2 was intended to feature stunts from Don Vito, but unfortunately, this is where things take a dark turn. On August 18, 2006, Vito was arrested at a local skate park in Lakewood, Colorado. It was alleged that during an autograph session, he inappropriately touched 3 teenage girls. That included groping a 12-year-old. He was immediately arrested and charged with the sexual assault of minors. The trial concluded a year later in October of 2007, where he was found guilty. Vito reportedly screamed, "Just kill me now," before collapsing to the floor and flailing around. "I can't spend the rest of my life in jail. You cops lied, and you can rot in fucking hell." He was sentenced to 10 years of probation in Pennsylvania. This included registering as a sex offender and not being allowed to portray Don Vito in any capacity. Vito was legally barred from appearing on TV and had to be digitally removed from Jackass 2. They even cut out a sketch he did in which he had an entire tooth pulled out by Bam's Lamborghini. Bam didn't take this lightly. He addressed his uncle's crimes on Radio Bam, viewing it as an injustice. He was so angry that he refused to host his regularly scheduled program.
"Sorry people, I'm too pissed off to do a show today. Let me just say this, fuck America and all you fuckers living in it, because I'm sick of people trying to get money off of slipping on a grape in the grocery store and fucking walking on a weak school roof and then breaking their leg when they're trying to break in, and then they get all kinds of fucking money. I think the lawyers and the people are all fucked up, and let me just sum up some shit about something that I'm not allowed to talk about because of the lawyers. Well, guess what, lady? Vito doesn't have any fucking money. He has a red Ford Ranger, and that's it. And the 75 grand that MTV gave him, he's spending on a fucking lawyer to defend himself. And the fact that he's so unhealthy, he's probably going to die this year. I think it's fucked that he has to spend the last few days of his miserable life flying back and forth to Colorado to defend himself about some piece of fucking bullshit fucking case with that you know that you're trying to get money. That's it. That's the only thing.
The defense that Bam and Vito's lawyer would have is that it was a character act gone wrong. He'd mimic choking guys and groping girls for photos. It was usually for show. But Vito was intoxicated that day. He straight up peed himself in public. Of course, this did little to convince people that it was okay to grope a 12-year-old. And Bam himself had previously noted Vito's disregard of consent.
Vito straight up rapes, dude. Novak gets pussy, I'll vouch.
And so does Vito.
Novak gets pussy. Vito does not get pussy.
Yes, he does.
No,
He
that
cops
just
fucking feels and
no.
he rapes
That
you.
just goes to show that
Yo, so many
anybody.
girls, if you girls are out there listening and Vito copped a feel on you, dude, sue his Dude, no, it's bad. Straight up, dude, Vito's a fucking little homo. He copped so many feels, ape.
It's unclear what he thought beyond his initial reaction, but it likely did little but complicate his already unstable life. For years, Bam was in a serious relationship with a woman named Jen Rivel. It wasn't a secret, with her presence felt in his various endeavors. To promote the CKY DVD, he even included a tape of them having intercourse as an Easter egg. By Viva La Bam, the two were engaged and living together. But behind the scenes, the relationship was tumultuous. Jen was alleged to be physically abusive, with Bam having to break things off. He'd even file a protective order against her in 2006 after she broke into his house. He alleged that she scaled the 10-foot wall of his mansion to break in through the back door. Then she yelled he shouldn't have broken up with her. He was granted his request. Jackass 2 released in September of 2006. It grossed $84.6 million, proving the franchise was here to stay. While they hadn't known each other at first, the cast became very close. Knoxville even encouraged them to film more stunts than necessary because he didn't want them to leave. There was so much extra footage they were able to release a second movie called Jackass 2.5, but the constant danger was beginning to take its toll. The film ends with a theatrical performance of the best of times, with decorated sets, complex choreography, and costumes. Bam and Ryan Dunn appeared together before being dragged away by a horse. Dunn would get the worst of this. He landed on his shoulder, causing a life-threatening blood clot. This deeply unsettled him as he was told by doctors he could die at any minute. While receiving the treatment, he was then diagnosed with Lyme disease. This pushed him into a deep depression to the point that he cut himself off from everyone for 2 years. Before Jackass 2, Steve-O was a full-on cokehead. But the film's production and family atmosphere actually helped him quit. This did not last once production ended.
Steve-O always really latches on to any family type of atmosphere. When we're doing Jackass, he's got us and that family. When he's doing Wild Boys, he's got that family. But when Jackass #2 was done, you know, we all kind of went our separate ways for a little bit. And then Steve-O's really left without a family.
Within months of his release, he was back on drugs to an even worse degree. Bam recalled, Steve-O was pretty much 24/7 out of his mind. He'd wake up to nitrous balloons, then drink vodka and grape juice, snort a line of Special K and then a line of Coke, and then smoke PCP with weed in it. Seriously, anything you can think of, he would do. He was on this path of pure destruction. Bam, in spite of his addiction, was comparatively functional. In fact, his life was progressing to the next stage. In high school, he met a girl named Melissa Rothstein. Shortly after his breakup with Jen, he reconnected with Missy, and the two began dating. In 2006, he proposed, with their wedding plans filmed for Bam's Unholy Union. The couple got married in downtown Philadelphia in front of 350 friends and family. That included the Jackass crew. The party became so intense he ended up shelling out $13,000 to cover damages. While Bam was in a better state than Steve-O, he had no shortage of his own issues. His alcoholism only got worse as he began to regularly make headlines in the tabloids. In 2009, Bam was rushed to the hospital after Missy reported a possible overdose. His severe dehydration turned out to be the result of a 4-day drinking binge. He publicly blamed it on marital problems, stating, "I may get a divorce. Booze helps." Missy would later state that his drinking severely affected his personality, likening it to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The two attempted to reconcile by attending couples counseling twice a week. He went into rehab, where he was prescribed Lexapro to help control his mood swings. While optimistic, it was unable to salvage their marriage. In 2010, he revealed on the Howard Stern show that they were now living separately. They only saw each other once a week. He alluded to having extramarital affairs, with his infidelity leading her to file for divorce. Meanwhile, Tremaine and Knoxville began conceptualizing a third Jackass. They intended to take advantage of 3D, with the project being greenlit in early 2010. The entire cast was back together, though there was one problem: Steve-O. On February 23, 2008, the cast appeared on MTV for a 24-hour takeover. He arrived incredibly intoxicated, slurring his words and causing a scene. This led him to be unceremoniously removed. A week and a half later, Steve-O was arrested for vandalizing a neighbor's property. A police search led him to be charged with a felony possession of cocaine. He was so out of his mind that he was involuntarily detained at a psych ward. The sobriety made him suicidal, and he sent a concerning mass email to his co-stars. "I figured out that I did a great deal of damage to my brain by abusing drugs. Now that they've all worn off, I'm facing the consequences." This led to his stay being extended from 72 hours to 14 days. On June 4th, he pled guilty but avoided jail by successfully completing treatment. He was now sober, though struggled enough that he returned to the institution a month later. "I've had horrible mood swings and severe depression. My brain is fucked up from using so much cocaine, ketamine, PCP, nitrous oxide, and all sorts of other drugs." There was a lifestyle that felt intrinsic to Jackass. It had the potential to cause him to relapse, ruining all of the progress he'd made. Because of this, it was agreed upon that during filming, they were all to remain sober. No alcohol was allowed on set. This didn't mean they would hold back, as their stunts intensified. I mean, this is the one where Steve-O is subjected to the poo cocktail supreme. He's strapped in a porta potty and slingshotted 150 feet in the air. Yet against all odds, it worked, and Steve-O remained sober to this very day. Jackass 3D released in October of 2010 and went on to become the franchise's highest grossing film. It was actually possible to be a daredevil without falling to substance abuse. With that said, the restriction didn't lead them all to get sober. Everyone except Steve-O would hit the bars after filming, a decision that ended up jeopardizing parts of the film. On June 12th, a fight broke out outside of Bam's bar in Westchester. It's unclear why it began, but it ended with a woman hitting Bam in the back of the head with a baseball bat. She was arrested on 5 charges, including felony assault. The injuries were so severe, Bam was placed in the ICU, with his head having to be stapled together. The assailant later claimed she attacked him because he called her the N-word. Bam denied this, stating, "I called her a crazy bitch and an idiot, but I definitely didn't use the N-word." His injuries forced them to rewrite the intro, as he no longer could handle the originally planned stunt. While one might expect this to have led Bam to become more careful, he continued to find himself in drunken altercations. In March of 2011, he became belligerent after a crowd of people mocked him. He singled out an overweight woman, calling her a sea otter. This led him to be pushed over and knocked out with a kick to the head. If you'll recall, Ryan Dunn became a recluse after the second movie. He cut off the entire cast for 2 years. This ended after being shown test footage for Jackass 3. He was impressed enough that he decided to return. He'd later reflect that it was the most fun he'd had in the franchise. But this comeback was cut tragically short. You see, even outside the 1995 crash, Dunn had a history of reckless driving. He'd amassed 23 traffic citations, including a DUI. It got to the point that in a DVD commentary for Viva La Bam, they predicted it'd lead to his death.
Well, the car he almost killed you kids in was not his car. He was supposed to be working on it. Well, Dunn learned his lesson when he rolled his car a couple months
Oh,
ago.
yeah, sure, he learned his lesson. He'll never learn his lesson.
Dunn destroyed his own car by rolling it, by driving like an asshole.
He always drives like an asshole.
Too true.
I'm serious.
He's the worst driver,
He's
too.
a grandstander. I'll tell you, he's going to eat it someday in a car accident.
He already has plenty of time. He's gonna eat it one of these times. He's wrecked 6 of other people's cars and 3 of his own.
I have him in the death pool
I know
for
that.
death by vehicle.
Yeah, he's the vehicle guy.
In the late hours of June 19th, 2011, Ryan and his friend Zachary Hartwell visited Barnaby's Westchester bar. He became the life of the party, buying drinks for everyone there. Ryan himself had at least 4 whiskey shots on top of a number of beers. The two left before 3:30 a.m., with Ryan driving in his Porsche 911. He would never make it back home. While driving, Ryan Dunn veered off the road at over 130 miles per hour. The vehicle flew over a guardrail, hitting a tree and bursting into flames. Both of the men were killed. Ryan's blood alcohol level was later found to be more than twice the state's legal limit. The loss of Dunn was felt throughout the entire industry. There was an outpour of grief from both fans and celebrities who mourned his loss. The Jackass cast would issue a statement denoting that they'd lost one of their own, and MTV would produce a 1-hour special paying tribute to his life. But few were as devastated as Bam, who had lost his best friend.
I've never lost anybody that I care about. It's my best friend. I was in Arizona when I heard, and I just remember I was with some friends having the best time ever. And at 12:30, I just started punching out the windows of the rental van and ripping out the speakers, and I don't even know why. I wasn't mad at anything or anybody, and if it's 12:30 there, that means that it was exactly when he crashed. He was the happiest person ever. The smartest guy. He had so much talent. And he had so many things going for him. It's just not right. It's not right. It was the worst phone call I've ever got in my life.
While there was overwhelming support, not everyone was sympathetic. Roger Ebert, an esteemed film critic, would tweet this out mere hours after his death. "Friends don't let jackasses drink and drive." Bam fired back, "I just lost my best friend. I've been crying hysterical for a full day, and a piece of shit Roger Ebert had the gall to put in his 2 cents about a jackass drunk driving, and his is one. Fuck you. Millions of people are crying right now. Shut your fat fucking mouth." Though insensitive, many were quick to point out that Ebert was right. He drank, he drove, 2 people died. They could have easily crashed into another car and killed more people, but it was said far too soon. A mistake the critic admitted himself. To lose one of his closest friends since childhood broke him, sparking a very public downward spiral. A month later, he was hospitalized after tackling his neighbor, breaking an arm and several ribs. In September, he was detained after punching a cab driver and kicking in the car door. That spring, he got into a street fight in Australia over a girl. His opponent was an undefeated professional boxer, and in August, he was kicked out of an airport for being loud and combative while reeking of booze. He defended himself by claiming the smell was from a bender the night before. By his own admission, 2012 was the year he lost control of his drinking. Not only was he struggling with the loss of Dunn, but bone spurs forced him to stop skating. With nothing else to do, he descended further and further as an escape from real life. On September 14th, Bam was sexually assaulted. In the middle of the night, a 24-year-old stalker broke into his home. He awoke to find her completely nude and kissing him. He pushed her off, only for the woman to masturbate on his bedroom floor. It was later discovered she'd been secretly living on his property for weeks, hiding out in his giant tree fort. Though the assault led him to get herpes, he didn't press charges. In November, his divorce with Missy was finally settled. His now ex-wife would tweet, "Officially divorced, happy, and finally free. Who want to come to my divorce party? Haha." It had been effectively over before this, but it was finally on paper. The timing couldn't have been better either, as it was around this time Bam entered a new long-term relationship. While at a concert in California, he met a model and photographer named Nicole Boyd. The two fell in love and quickly began dating. Within a year, the couple was engaged, and on October 5th, 2013, married. The ceremony was held at the Random Hero Festival in Iceland. The vows were followed by a charity performance from his band, Fuckface Unstoppable. Bam had vacationed to the country several times that previous year. He recalled it as Dunn's favorite place, with the two first visiting amid CKY, but he refused to respect their laws. He'd end up in legal trouble after wrecking a rental car. Over the span of 5 days, he kicked the door in, left scratches, and covered the back seat in paint. He later explained this trashing was the result of a drunken stupor. Following this, there was a noticeable absence of his name from headlines. His love for Nikki seemed to quell his worst behaviors, at least temporarily. Instead, he found himself at odds with another friend's addiction. Early on, I touched on a skater named Brandon Novak. Bam had known him since he was 10 years old. He'd similarly gone professional at a young age. At 14, Novak joined the Powell Peralta team, which had members like Tony Hawk. However, he left after being given an ultimatum over his drug abuse. This was the beginning of a 2-decade-long battle with addiction. He'd undergo rehab 13 times among multiple arrests and overdoses. He stole from and manipulated loved ones to continue indulging. He even engaged in prostitution to support his habit. In 2003, he managed to stay sober for 5 years, but relapsed on heroin in 2007. It left him worse than before. Bam described it as the worst he'd ever seen, as he was just killing himself now. Yet, throughout it all, Novak made appearances in Jackass and Bam's other ventures. Bam and the crowd I ran with, everyone liked to party, so if people wanted to be friends with me, they came up to me and handed me drugs. It's not like I was running with the most sober of crowds. Bam found himself frequently lending a hand to his childhood friend. Howard Stern would question him on this in an interview with the two in 2014.
Do you ever say to yourself, because you are a movie star and you do have a career, do you ever say, what am I doing with Novak? I mean, do you ever question your friendship with him? Have you ever had a moment where you almost gave up on him?
I know that he's never going to pay me $125,000 back. He already owes $300,000 in hospital bills in Baltimore for ODs.
To be fair, there were several points where they'd institutionalized him or imposed sobriety. That was the case when, after amassing over 30 arrests, Bam finally put his foot down. Novak was the opening act for his band, performing naked and intoxicated as Phil Collins. In May of 2015, they were scheduled to tour in Australia. Novak was only allowed to drink. Yet, shortly before the flight, Bam caught him with $500 worth of heroin. He told him to get out and he banned him from touring. He then called Novak's mother and informed her of what happened, leading him to become homeless. In the end, this decision saved Novak's life. He was forced to detox by his probation officer, and at rock bottom, he finally took it seriously. Ever since that day, he's been completely sober. Now, you might be wondering why I'm going into so much detail about Novak when this video is mostly focused on Bam. That's because, like Steve-O, there was an air of relativity. Novak's drug abuse always made Bam's behavior seem insignificant. Bam was the one who got to lecture them on how destructive addiction could be. But eventually, both were able to conquer their demons and come out as functional, fuller people. That June, Bam got into a vicious fight in Iceland at the Secret Solstice Festival. He attempted to drunkenly strong-arm his way into the production room, heckling two women. The commotion was heard by a group of local rappers, who then knocked him out. When Bam returned, he entered rehab for the first time since 2009. But he'd leave without finishing the program, instead deciding to film this video for his so-called Earth Rockers.
You don't have to be a musician to be an Earth Rocker. Payback's a bitch, motherfucker.
He then went on a bender so severe his mother stepped in. April was unable to convince him to go back to rehab, so she instead proposed they appear on a reality show, Family Therapy with Dr. Jen. He surprisingly agreed, and season 1 would partially chronicle his alcoholism.
My mom probably worries about me 98% of the day, because she never knows what kind of call she's gonna get.
This revealed the extent of his issues to the public for the first time. He was overweight and slurred so heavily that subtitles were required to understand him. His right hand is seen bloodied as he drunkenly punched a car window the night prior. He'd admit that he hadn't gone longer than a week without drinking in 10 years. He also reveals that his lifestyle required him to relearn skating. While the decision to appear on this type of show is questionable, it was helpful. Bam was forced to quit cold turkey, and he remained sober for the next 6 months. He moved twice, first to Estonia and then to Spain. He got in better shape and focused on skating for the first time in 5 years. He even began selling merchandise celebrating his sobriety. People were hopeful that he'd finally stop the spiral sparked by Dunn's passing, but a few incidents painted a different picture. That summer, he was arrested in Finland after an extremely heated argument with his wife. It's unclear what it was over, but one thing was for certain. He was back to drinking. Months prior, Nikki had gotten into a car crash herself while under the influence. She wrecked his Porsche. These both indicated that the couple now shared a toxic relationship with alcohol, but things went quiet after the couple moved back to Pennsylvania. It was for good reason. Nikki was now pregnant with his son. On December 23rd, 2017, Phoenix Wolf Margera was born. Bam was now a father, so it was more important than ever he got himself straight. You know where this is going. In an interview, Bam claimed to have been mostly sober since 2015, but to state the obvious, casual drinking for a recovering alcoholic is a recipe for disaster. 16 days after the birth of his child, he was arrested again for drunk driving and given probation. He went back to rehab, which led him to remain sober for the next 7 months. Then, he was robbed at gunpoint while visiting Colombia. Okay, it's kind of understandable why he'd drink then, but that's assuming you can take him at his word. Steve-O would publicly call this out as an excuse, pleading for him to stop on TMZ. He shed doubt on this claim of being 7 months sober.
And then I saw on TMZ talking about him drinking again. It's sad, dude. Like, I kind of saw the signs, right? You know, I mean, it wasn't a surprise, and if anything would surprise me, it's that he only drank then. You know, not to be calling him out and trying to talk shit about him, but just looking at what he's posting, you can kind of see where he's at.
The fact this had to be said publicly is a sign of what's to come. It was getting to the point that he couldn't be helped privately. Novak would echo this sentiment, writing, "His demons seem to have the best of him at the moment. So God willing, if and whenever he's ready, I will do whatever it takes to get him sober." It turns out that after the DUI, his friend staged an intervention to no avail. Bam began drinking regularly again, having vodka at clubs every other day. It got to the point that he was blackout pissing on counters and getting into fights again. He'd fully relapsed, a fact that wouldn't be made public until he checked back into rehab for New Year's 2019. Third time's the charm. He left after 10 days, stating he didn't belong there and that he could do better on his own. This was explained in a handwritten letter that was also a bitter response to Steve-O and Novak. "Dear assholes who want to talk shit about my sobriety, I realized all my friends that were raging drug addicts were hell on wheels, piles of pure shit that I thought could never get help. All of them are now sober, including Steve-O and Novak especially. I thought they were lifers who will never stop, and they did." Now keep in mind, Novak was a raging liar, cheater, heroin addict, Xanax addict, Vicodin, Percocet 30s, diluted Suboxone, methadone, and red wine blackouts. He had a major problem and needed to get fixed. My problem is when I get bored, I drink alcohol and then suddenly I'm not bored. I have never had a pill problem of any kind. I am on and off prescribed Adderall, and besides that, I would occasionally do cocaine with a stranger that offered me a bump in the bathroom. So suck on my shit and eat my fuck. If you think I left rehab to go party, I'm not interested. Without alcohol stepping in my way to ruin it again, I'm on a mission. Thanks to the rehab, bye to the rehab, now off I go to finish what I started. 2 months later, TMZ released a video showing Margera screaming at his manager in a comedy club.
"We came early because you said to come early. Where is everybody? There's 50 people sold tonight. Take me home. All right, we'll go home. Now! Get my Range Rover and take me home. I'm leaving. Take me home now for a second. I'm going now. I'm going. I don't know. I'm going. Mother. I'm going right now. What the man?
He'd explain his anger in a series of Instagram posts, insulting his street wife.
"My wife left me and she went back with my Range Rover. That shit. If I don't see her at the show, I'm canceling it. And she better be in a new outfit because she always wears the same thing or else I'll break shit."
The street hoe took all my credit cards and went back home. And now I'm at the Soho Grand and I can't check in because she took all my credit cards. I better see you in 1 hour and 24 minutes, Nikki.
His family tried to have him committed, but it only lasted a week. There was nothing they could do to force him to get help. Bam needed to want it himself. Instead, he began hosting open house parties at his mansion, Castle Bam. He announced them on Instagram and instantaneously drew crowds of thousands, who were more than willing to indulge him. His postings slowly became more deranged as he seemed to lose grip on reality. Take, for example, this one that preceded a party. He demanded Novak pay him for all the money he lended over the years. If not, he'd regret it for the rest of his life. He then suggests they collect 50 days worth of skater urine to fill a hot tub. Whoever stays in with a partner who can shit on command will receive a $100 cash prize. 100 whole dollars, how generous. With rants like these, it's no surprise that longtime friends felt he was going to die, and it only got worse as time went on. He claimed to be done with both his wife and Novak. "I've spent my whole life fixing Novak. Now that he's fixed, he forgets who fixed him." He also created a secret language called the Vampire Alphabet. There was a new obsession with creating nonsensical drawings. He attempted to explain them, leading viewers to suspect he was abusing Adderall.
It becomes on this side a D, English, and on that side a D. So now it just becomes half. When you read the circle, it's just a C on both angles. So a 0 is technically a C. It's everything of how it got created. So, because, why? Because I said so. That would mean E. So this English language, A, B, C, D, E, F, because D, E, F, G. Good.
When Novak was at his lowest in 2015, Bam and Joe France did a podcast discussing his heroin addiction. 4 years later, and the roles were reversed. They offer unique insight into his situation and dispel many of the excuses offered for him. That included the idea of his spiral being the result of Dunn's death. This is because Ryan had been present at Bam's very first intervention in 2009.
I mean, we're all there begging Bam to go into a rehab. We had the rehab people there. Everything was ready to go. The room was set up, and Bam was so furious. He goes, "This better not be a intervention. I'm not even drunk." And we were like, Bam, you're not drunk now. You were drunk 3 hours ago. You just slept it off. He was furious and he went up, and Ryan Dunn was the one who walked up those stairs and came out of that room with Bam about 25 minutes later, and Bam said, I'm ready to go. And for years, Bam has been telling everyone, he's been telling the world, he was so heartbroken when Ryan Dunn died. His whole life fell apart, and that's when he began his substance abuse. That is an addict's lie to himself, because Ryan was there for that first intervention.
So now we're seeing this pattern develop that you're explaining very vividly, by the way, might I add. Thank you for that. I think you're painting a really good picture of the disease of alcoholism. And this pattern has emerged. What it boils down to is justification and deflection. Sleight of hand type tricks, smoking mirrors, if you will. Everything, everyone else, please don't focus on my situation at hand.
Whenever he was on substances, he wasn't reliable, likening him to Jekyll and Hyde once again. This apparently led him to flake on a movie gig, which got him blacklisted from Hollywood. By pushing away his business associates and peers, all that were left were the bottom feeders.
Bam always dictating the terms of how he will get better when he has put himself in these positions.
So now his life is consumed by even worse bottom feeders. By even the biggest scumbags in town are now the only people that can take this anymore, and coming and living at his house and mooching off him. And I mean, one guy came over his house, sold one of his four-wheelers to a contractor came by the house. He's like, hey man, like I'm selling this four-wheeler, you want it? And the guy took it home. and then the fucking people were like stealing so much money.
That was our old coke dealer.
He was now surrounded by people who wanted to use him for his fame and fortune. They claimed to have his best interests at heart while supplying him with parties and liquor. These enablers don't deserve to be recognized by name. The most infamous became the laughingstock of a podcast called Cumtown. He'd gotten on the show for them 2 days before the comedy club incident, a tour that he booked in the first place. That summer, Bam began making vague allusions to the end. Done as dust, and I'm off to a coffin. This, unsurprisingly, led to a wellness check, which only upset him more. On August 3rd, he was kicked off a flight for berating security. It was fueled by marital woes, as he quickly made clear on Instagram. I ain't playing games, I am done with this relationship. I have one rule, Nikki. When I talk, don't start talking. He then insults her for dropping out of high school to wind up as a sex shop worker. Steve-O and Chris Pontius attempted to calm him down in the comments, but went ignored. He instead publicly asked for help from Dr. Phil.
Dr. Phil, I need your help in a big way. My family is in shambles. It's been worse than it's ever been, ever. I've disowned my mom. Nikki, I can't stand her. I'll tell you why. She's stubborn. As a matter of fact, I've printed 5 pages about stubborn, and she's too stubborn to read stubborn. It would drive a person fucking bonkers. So when people say Bam might be going crazy, fucking A, maybe they're right.
Bam's faith in him was bizarre. He claimed that it was due to the failure of his previous 28 doctors. The last time he went to rehab, they even put him on more medication than when he was out. That included treatment for bipolar disorder, of which he was now formally diagnosed. The TV show host agreed immediately, recording a conversation the next day. They were joined by April and Nikki, of whom he aired out his issues with. He argued they were overbearing, likening his wife to the FBI. He rants about his mother not letting bottom feeders live with him. He then spoke about his addiction. He revealed that if not for seeing his son, he would have taken his life amid the latest breakdown. The episode ends with Bam agreeing to rehab and therapy. He did check in, but bailed within days. The first thing he did was get a Dr. Phil tattoo to show his gratitude. Then he stopped taking his bipolar meds and cut off family. Not even a week later, he was arrested at a hotel under bizarre circumstances. He claimed to other patrons that he was hired by one of their wives to catch them cheating. Upon arrival, the officer told him, "This is not a fucking reality TV show. I know you're fresh out of rehab, so let's get your shit together." He was readmitted, this time with serious guidelines. They demanded a commitment from him, which he agreed to, but he left after they wouldn't let him use his phone and went back to hitting up bars. He tried again and failed, and then again, it was bleak. But surprisingly, this visit would actually be his last for a while. That's because he was invited by Steve-O and Johnny Knoxville with a pitch. You see, they were in talks to make a 4th Jackass film, and everyone wanted Bam involved, but they couldn't jeopardize the production or his health to do so. So it was offered with a simple condition: Bam had to stay clean. This had the potential to break the cycle, a catalyst to change his life. It had, after all, done so for Steve-O all those years ago. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He'd be spending time with old friends, making money, and along the way guided to a life of sobriety. On August 22nd, Bam posted, "Today I stopped my shenanigans as a promise to myself and Johnny Monty Knoxville." Knoxville replies, "I'm going to hold you to that, Bam Bam." Talks of Jackass 4 continued over the following months. The two were spotted on Paramount Lot as Bam looked much healthier and upbeat. Even his speech was more coherent. On September 11th, a formal contract was drafted to clarify their terms. It states Bam was to stay in treatment for 90 days. Then, he had to remain sober and only take medication approved by medical staff. Bam agreed and completed the first step, 3 months of rehab, that January. And with that, he was officially on board for the project.
Is it true about Jackass 4? Yes, it is. We start filming in February. Am I scared? Medium, yeah, because I usually break 2 bones while we're filming, and I'm 40 now, so I don't know how much I could handle this time, but
In March, he traveled to Los Angeles where he fell victim to their first prank, Silence of the Lambs. He was trapped in the dark and had rattlesnakes thrown on him. They geared up to continue filming, only for production to shut down shortly due to the pandemic. This forced them to bide time as the shoot was in purgatory. In the meantime, Bam appeared on Steve-O's podcast. Steve-O, who was once paid only $200 per bit, now had a blossoming solo career. He'd turned his notoriety into a loyal online audience. He was now so well known that he passed Bam and became second billing. Yet, he used the platform to hype his friend up, reminiscing about the glory days. Jackass 4 wouldn't resume until 7 months later in October. Bam was understandably quiet, having an NDA. But with his recovery and rekindled friendships, it truly seemed like he'd been saved. That is, until early 2021 when his insane ramblings returned. At the encouragement of followers, he quit his medication. The bottom feeders reappeared, as did his alphabet. And he injured himself while skateboarding, tempting him to take painkillers. Immediately, people realized he was spiraling again, but were helpless to stop it. They hoped that, at least, it wouldn't jeopardize his obligations. Well, whatever hopes they had were dashed on February 10th when he began lashing out at his co-stars. He leaked several messages in which he accused Novak of lying. He had his eyes on him and derided him as the most fucked pussy that's ever lived. He went on to fail Paramount's sobriety test and was officially removed from Jackass 4. It immediately led into a public meltdown, fueled by 7 beers and a bottle of wine.
Who the cares if I'm drunk as hell or not anymore? Jackass has put me through hell on wheels for a year and a half. Keeping me in Pennsylvania, I couldn't leave. Then I had to wake up every day with a handful of antidepressant pills that I would have to show Paramount Pictures that I took them and swallowed them every single day. I wrote them so many ideas, and if I'm not in the movie and they use my ideas, how do you think that that'll make me feel? The last thing I want to do is be in a courtroom with Jeff Tremaine. I love him. Jackass was everything to me. And now I'm so relieved to Knoxville. You Spike. You Jeff. You never cared about me, man.
He'd been struggling to stay clean for a while. Early in production, he left without notice, with staff rediscovering him back in rehab. But his dismissal led him to contemplate death, attempting to learn how to tie a noose. It was a full-on manic episode. The next day, Bam reversed course and admitted fault. It's going to be fucking awesome, and it's going to be in a way where everyone wins in the end, so I love everybody. He claimed to be getting help from a bipolar specialist. Then he continued ranting and raving. He called for fans to boycott the film, claiming if they all sent him $1, he'd make a much radder movie. His ideas for stunts include the pissing well shower, which is pretty self-explanatory. Then there's the baby pool piss shower, where the Jackass crew would pee on him and Steve-O. They were leftovers from his time on Jackass 4. So was the title, which he called We're Not Done Yet, in reference to Ryan Dunn. Bam published a letter directed to Jeff Tremaine that is just incomprehensible. I don't know what this means. And in a similar vein, he posted this heartogram that reads, Jackass was my family, abandoned, betrayed, and greed, as well as the 3 producers who betrayed him. They took everything from me. This continued for months. He went so far as to post coded messages in his secret language to prevent Tremaine from reading them, all while ignoring his own responsibility. It was his decision to break their agreement and return to his destructive house parties. The contract had been done for his own well-being, but he was too mentally ill to even acknowledge that. He mockingly made 2 fake contracts, asking for permission to smash their heads in. It refers to the original clause as a ripoff and calls Tremaine a greedy fat pussy. He later compares him to Harvey Weinstein. His targets, on the other hand, remained completely silent. Things weren't much better in his personal life either. He posted a video in which he purchases sex toys for his wife, but there's a misunderstanding resulting in an uncomfortable argument.
I bought you this awesome big rubber dick so you can go f yourself.
So you wasted all your money on that? Okay, where's my wand? And that is too big.
Well,
That's not gonna even
you
fit.
deserve to feel the pain.
He complains about his son preventing him from having sex, now only getting to have it every 10 days if he's lucky. She seemed dissatisfied anyway, recalling an incident where she said, "I took my tampon out for that." In response, Nikki berates him for not showering or brushing his teeth. I just want to point out that this entire video takes place in a handicapped parking spot. Bam's behavior only continued to escalate. In May, he invoked Dunn to claim that he would have also been upset over this injustice. He then implied he had blackmail on Johnny Knoxville. This screenshot alludes to a secretly recorded sex tape of him cheating on his wife. It's unknown if this has any basis in reality, but he also showed their Instagram DMs where he writes, "If you're gonna fuck me and not give Phoenix his jackass money, then I will just fuck you back way harder." Ryan Dunn is very, very upset with you, PJ. This implies Bam believes he can spiritually talk to the ghost of Ryan Dunn. Needless to say, Bam had burned all the bridges that had just been rebuilt. That is, with the exception of Steve-O. Steve-O continued to talk to him every day and even hung out with him in person. This is all while defending the people Bam was chastising without pulling any punches. The two people who you're saying wronged you are the same two people who organized the intervention which saved my life. Everyone bent over backwards to get you in the movie, and all you had to do was not get loaded. You've continued to get loaded, it's that simple. We all love you every bit as much as we all say we do, but nobody who really loves you can enable or encourage you to stay sick. Bam would look past this, though lashed out at far more innocuous comments from strangers. The following was in response to a message that said, "Get well, Bam. I am well, you shithead. I am simply frustrated with people like you. Delete me or I will fly to your dumb house to shit in your hula hoops and fuck your non-existent girlfriend." As the months went on, Bam refused to stop threatening their lives. This ultimately led Tremaine to file a restraining order against him. It turns out he was behaving even worse in private. He'd gone so far as to threaten Jeff's children. "Look at your children and grab your pocketbook and write a check. If you are greedy and cheap, look at your children again. If you don't sign the paper, look at your children. Sign your stupid fucking contract before you're not safe anywhere. You are the reason I am ever batshit crazy." Naturally, the course of action here is to do it again publicly. He leaked himself calling Knoxville a nigger pussy while referencing the alleged revenge porn. If you're wondering what his day-to-day was like at this point, this post was made at the same time on r/trashy. Met one of the jackasses the other night. He kicked down my bedroom door, grabbed my friend inappropriately, and called me a bitch. A video from that night shows him fighting on their lawn. 4 days later, Bam traveled to Arizona to hang out with girls on TikTok. He then visited a very special lady in Florida to have some peace and quiet from his son. His words, not mine.
I'm in Florida. I realize that I have the peace and quiet, no offense, Phoenix, but when he hits this certain frequency, when he cries, I can't even think straight. It makes me go more batshit than what Johnny Knoxville and Tremaine made me go through with their stupid contract.
He was looking worse than ever and completely off the rails, so it was no surprise that Jeff was quickly granted a 3-year restraining order. Bam was now legally required to stay 100 yards away from him and his family, though it did nothing to stop Bam from running his mouth, as he only grew more bitter. On July 20th, the first trailer for Jackass Forever was released. It was to great fanfare, with anticipation from everyone who grew up on the franchise. This enraged him to the point that he hired a lawyer. On August 9th, he filed a wrongful termination suit against Paramount, Johnny Knoxville, and Spike Jonze. It claimed he was subjected to inhumane treatment, likening the wellness agreement to psychological torture. He also requested an injunction prohibiting its release. The latter was unsuccessful, though the case wasn't dismissed. There were legitimately some grounds of potential coercion. He'd been approached with the offer after just 1 day in rehab. This made it possible to argue it was signed under duress. Tremaine responded by outlining the specifics of his firing. He alleged that Bam began taking illicit amphetamines in July of 2020. The only reason he was allowed to stay was because the cast was desperate to keep him in, but Paramount ultimately disagreed and dropped the axe. Yeah, it wasn't even his decision. The case was ultimately settled out of court, with Bam having it dismissed. It's unknown what the agreement was, but there was likely some monetary recourse. The producers had, after all, previously agreed to put money in a trust account for Phoenix. The film was released in early 2022 and made a total of $80 million worldwide. He appears in only one stunt, in which they play instruments on a treadmill. For all the troubles he caused them, no one ever returned fire. Knoxville's only public comment was, "I don't want to get into a public back and forth with Bam. I just want him to get better." I mentioned that in June, Bam mentioned visiting a very special woman. This was actually a private celebrity specialist named Lima Jevrimovic. It was an intervention with a legal layer that made her his guardian. He was taking daily outpatient classes in Florida while living with a friend and relative. This also meant intentional distance from his marriage, with Nikki filing for custody but not divorce. However, this proved controversial as Lima had a dubious track record. Her company specializes in unproven virtual reality therapy, and in one instance, a patient died under her care. This raised fear that Bam was being taken advantage of and unable to escape. It wasn't helped that he lost phone privileges after drinking at a casino. It's unclear how invasive their relationship was, but Bam did appear to be getting better. He was in better shape and seemed to be healing his relationships. In May 2022, Nikki and Phoenix began living with him again. Not long after, he completed a 12-month drug and alcohol treatment program. His brother remarked in an interview,
I feel like I'm talking to Bam again, you know? Right.
But then the couple began arguing again. It culminated in a breakup, with Nikki taking their son and leaving. He was unable to contact her for the next 2 weeks, and so on June 15th, he fled rehab. He was found by police at a hotel later that day. He returned, only to leave again a week and a half later. All the progress he'd made thrown away in the blink of an eye. But there was now a new element in the mix. These headlines fueled conspiracies that he was under control. They believed he was under a conservatorship, a la Britney Spears. The result was a movement of people calling to free Bam. While it's true many consider Lima questionable, many of these supporters were little more than enablers. This is something even Steve-O pointed out himself in a podcast.
I would love to set the record straight that number one, Bam has not ever been under a conservatorship. The temporary guardianship he was under did not ever have any financial implications, and what's come to be known as the Free Bam movement has really been very toxic. It's served to try to assassinate the character of Bam's former guardian, Lima, who has never been paid to work on Bam's case, has never done anything but try to help Bam, and it's been very upsetting to see people not only encouraging Bam to leave treatment and go get loaded, but just attacking this woman who's been so helpful and so beloved by Bam's family and friends. So I just wanted to set the record straight on that.
When Bam left the facility on June 25th, he went to meet with friends at a sports bar. Then they went out to a strip club. Afterward, he crashed at a friend's house and can be seen nodding in and out of consciousness.
What up, cuz? Let's go,
In response, his family issued a statement calling the movement a threat to his sobriety. It did little to convince them, but shows how much faith they'd personally put into her progress. It's no secret that Bam has struggled with mental health and addiction. The Free Bam movement has caused confusion and a threat to Bam and our families. Although we love sharing our lives with you, some things need to be handled privately. Bam has never been in a conservatorship, but rather a temporary healthcare guardianship for reasons not shared with the public. If Bam chooses to speak to this, he will when he is ready. The Free Bam theorists have encouraged his exit from treatment, despite their lacking knowledge of the details, his health and well-being. We kindly ask you to respect the process and our family. On September 4th, Bam left treatment once more. But this time there was a catch. He began bragging about a new lawyer friend he'd met who offered to undermine his court-mandated rehab. Within days, Bam was spotted at a bar with a mysterious woman and no longer speaking to his parents. His program was then restructured to an outpatient approach. The lawyer had suggested that Bam leave the state. Bam was then seen at a party in Atlanta, Georgia. He was drinking with strangers and name-dropping himself for attention. A month later, he hit Vegas, never completing treatment. Jess vented about it on Twitter. I was just informed my brother's lawyer sent him a text saying it's totally fine if he has a drink or two. How do I stand a chance when there's a constant barrage of clueless assholes with him at all times? Please, people, help me. My beard is gray and I'm fucking dying. My brother now has a team of 2 or 3 enabling lawyers that would have no problem invoicing me and fill their bills for helping him die after fake crying at his funeral. If Bam was spiraling before, he was now reaching terminal velocity. But no one could have predicted what happened next. That December, Bam faced death closer than he'd ever had to before. It started when, amid his partying, he caught COVID-19. This led his body to shut down and suffer from 4 seizures, with each lasting 10 to 20 minutes. The 4th led him to bite his tongue so hard that he began swallowing his own infected blood. He contracted pneumonia, which sent him into another seizure. He was placed in the intensive care unit, requiring a ventilator as he couldn't breathe on his own. He was briefly pronounced dead, though did thankfully survive. He was released just in time to be there for his son's birthday. In light of this, Steve-O reached out to once again extend his hand. He invited Bam to open for 9 shows in his comedy tour. He was terrified of where his friend's path was headed, and wanted him to help find a happy ending. It was a hit, with his appearances drawing huge applause. Their last show was in Santa Rosa, California on January 29th. There, Bam got to see Phoenix and brought him on stage. Bam was in an environment where he was ensured to be sober. He was given an opportunity to see his estranged son, but it was all in vain, as Bam immediately went back to his old ways. That night, he posted an old picture of himself with Johnny Knoxville and Steve-O. It was captioned, "One arm is my best friend who had my fucking back all along. Another is a poser, a procreation thief. If Jeff Tremaine was in this photo, he would be too greedy to fit. Fuck Jeff. Remember I tattooed that on me long ago, Jeff? It was because I knew who you were all along. Much love and respect, Steve-O. This is when Steve-O finally gave up. Bam, last night you had your 5-year-old son with you on stage at my show, and you were blessed with a chance to spend another day or two with him. Then as soon as you left my show, you stayed up all night getting loaded enough to think it was a good idea to post more vile nonsense like this. I hope you understand how awful that is. You say you want to have a relationship with your son, but your actions guarantee the exact opposite will happen. I brought you on tour with me in hopes that I could get you to see what's possible for you if you choose recovery. I've tried everything I can, but I can't force you to get honest and do the work of recovery. I wish you could know how much I've hated feeling braced for news of your death, but you're making it clear that I have no other choice. You're dying, brother, and it sucks that I can't do anything to save you. On February 15th, Nikki filed for legal separation. This was triggered by a specific incident when Bam spent time with her in Phoenix. He was acting inappropriately, leading her to believe he was intoxicated. Not only that, but he stopped sending $5,000 a month in support. This was troubling as she was evicted and couldn't afford to send their child to school. That's not to say Bam was in the best position financially either. At his peak, he had a net worth of $45 million. In 2021, that halved to 20. By January of 2023, it reportedly dwindled to $5 million. In response, Bam took to Instagram and chastised Nikki and her lawyer. He claimed they were never officially married as he didn't live in Iceland. Then he hit the strip club. On March 7th at 5:30 a.m., Bam was arrested for domestic violence. The victim alleged her husband kicked her, but it wasn't Nikki, and instead a new girlfriend. He was released after posting the $50,000 bail. The case remains unsettled. While Bam was upset with Nikki, he offered support if he was able to see Phoenix. He vowed to be a better father, even getting a tattoo of his son's name in Arabic. On March 29th, the two had a phone call to negotiate visitation. Bam was in a hotel room at the time with his girlfriend. However, things got heated as he began shouting. It was so loud that a guest reported it to authorities. They were subsequently asked to leave, and they did. But instead of calming down, Bam decided to confront her in person. He traveled to the restaurant where Nikki and Phoenix were dining and began screaming. He demanded her to let Phoenix have his own mind, as she wanted him to wait 5 days. The other patrons watched silently as onlookers began recording his outburst.
Phoenix has his own mind. I want to see Daddy now. Well, Phoenix, maybe we should be fighting. No, but I want to see Daddy now. You're making up his own mind. Let him have his own mind. Let him have his own mind. I want to see Daddy now. No, Phoenix, it's gonna be 5 days. Why you make me wait in 5 days?
They alerted law enforcement, who attempted to reason with him. He can be seen sitting on the curb and continuing to argue. Because of this, he was arrested and booked for public intoxication. 5 days later, he was bailed out and threatened violence, this time against Johnny Knoxville. He is, to this day, still upset over the sobriety clause.
Knoxville and Tremaine made me sign this basically a death waiver to take 18 medications. Maybe a zombie. I couldn't get my car. I couldn't. My own wife. I couldn't. Stiff muscles, bald hair, fat, weight gain. You motherfuckers. Jeff Tremaine is too much of a pussy to get in the ring with me. But Knoxville, if I double dog dare him, he says if I double dog dare anything, he'll do it. So, Knoxville, I double dog dare you to get in the ring with me without any boxing gloves so I could ring, 1, 2, 3, let's go. I fuck you up. Let's go.
3 days later, a restraining order was filed by Daniel Cardenas. Bam's current girlfriend is a woman named Jessica, who has an 8-year-old daughter. The couple began staying in his home after the domestic violence case. This caused issues after Daniel began having very loud intercourse. It apparently led Bam to threaten him in the middle of the night. "You have 12 hours to leave the house or I will kill you with my brass knuckles." Daniel's roommate heard this and forced Bam to leave, only for him to return an hour and a half later. This time he was given 12 seconds and shown his handful of rings. Bam responded by confirming the events happened.
I just love these restraining orders. Jeff Tremaine put one out on me because he was so scared of me and I was in Florida. How am I going to do anything? But this dude, Danny, put one out on me because I told him I beat him up with brass knuckles. No, I got rings on. But he showed up at 3 a.m. when my 8-year-old daughter, Isabel, is in there, and he stepped over her with a 60-year-old lady and an 18-year-old and had a fucking threesome as she's hearing sex noises. She's going to have PTSD, so yes, I will fuck you up.
The petition was dismissed for unknown reasons. Bam's behavior, meanwhile, was becoming more alarming by the day. The erratic behavior was turning into a propensity for violence, both in public and private. He was only becoming more and more detached from normalcy, losing the few earnest ties he had. Following his arrest for public intoxication, several longtime friends held an intervention. According to TMZ, he was receptive at first, but Jessica would have nowhere to live if he went to rehab. The final straw was Nikki's phone call, who said he'd be welcomed back if he got sober. This upset his current girlfriend, who kicked them all out. If true, this was an incredibly selfish decision, one that would immediately lead to his lowest point yet. On March 24th, Pennsylvania State Police responded to a disturbance near Pocopson Township. Bam was accused of some sort of physical confrontation, but by the time they arrived, he'd fled the scene. This led to a warrant for his arrest, and made headlines, though the circumstances wouldn't become clear until hours later. It turned out the alleged victims were his own family. It began around 8 a.m. when he banged on Jess's bedroom door with a note. It read, "If you even fucking think of calling the police on me, I will officially fuck you up." Jess went downstairs to find his brother peeing in the kitchen sink. He attempted to make coffee, at which point a fight broke out. Bam struck him multiple times on the head before stating, "I'll kill you. I'll put a bullet in your head." He then allegedly threatened to kill everyone in the house, which included his dad and 2 other women. He then fled into the woods. Police observed visible injuries, as Jess later speculated he may have suffered permanent hearing damage. He took to Twitter to give insight to how bad things had gotten. He claimed Bam was addicted to meth and now suffered from hallucinations. This included an incident in which he screamed at a person that wasn't there. He also called out Jessica for endangering her child. Bam remained missing for the next 3 days, but he'd find time to make hateful calls to his family. He was angry they'd put him in rehab the year prior. He accused them of selling his home and stealing money. He threatened to sue them for it. On March 27th, Bam surrendered to the authorities. He immediately shared a photo to Instagram and denied the allegations. He states that he'll be sued for defamation and be evicted from Castle Bam sooner than later. "The reason I lost my cool is because he wants to find a way to 302 me. Fuck him." He continued the next day, this time denying his meth use. "Well, my brother made false accusations of me being on meth. Guess what, Jesse Margera? The results are negative. People expel 70% of meth in their urine within 24 hours. But for the sake of his son, he was done drinking." Right. In response, Jess wrote, "A fun fact that Bam Bam doesn't realize is that his girlfriend went through his pants pockets in front of my own very eyes and found little bags of meth in his very pockets. Whoops." That's also ignoring the years of people around Bam referencing his habit.
Now there's like serious Adderall in play, lots of sniffing of blow, and then somewhere along the line he's picked up to like graduating to crystal meth, right? Like that's another icing on this cake, is that he's into meth these days.
Jess is, as of writing, planning to leave Castle Bam on his own accord, cutting his brother off for good. Bam, meanwhile, has only continued to chastise his parents, ranting about April's attempts at checking in. Jess claims he frequently threatens to put a bullet in her brain. His net worth, as of 2023, is speculated to be just $1 million, 1/45th of what he had at his peak. This was a guy who at one point could afford 2 brand new Audi S4s, just for fun. Now, he's basically destined to be broke. With the most recent allegations occurring so frequently, it's unclear how things will unfold. But one thing is for certain, with even his family unable to tolerate him, he's reached a lower point than ever before. The only people left are his most diehard sycophants who parrot his bizarre ramblings uncritically. But if former associates, friends, and family are telling you that you have a problem, maybe everyone isn't crazy. There's a lot of factors throughout Bam's life that undoubtedly contributed to his current state. The coddling from his parents early on enabled his rebellious behavior. His young fame and wealth allowed him to never grow up. But for every variable and circumstance you could blame, there's always someone else whose outcome stands contrary. The only difference then is that Bam is Bam. He refuses to change. But with his bank account rapidly depleting and his loved ones drifting away, it seems unlikely for now that this spiral will ever stop. But only time can tell. Or perhaps he'll finally wake up when he truly hits rock bottom. I've been Turkey Tom. Thanks for watching, and until next time, leave me alone. Also, a special thanks to Bernie Vids for his help with this video. Bye.
Just not that funny anymore.